From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line on this Thursday. Nick Barris with you. We have a good show on tap as always. I want to remind you this morning for the program, we're not only coming to you right now on the Plus, but we're also streaming live on the Facebook at newschannel5.com. If you'd like to message, I'll be monitoring this if you have questions or comments. We're going to continue to talk along the lines of maybe what we have the last couple of days. Yesterday, we had Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall on. He was already pre-scheduled, but his timing of coming on right after that horrendous shooting at the elementary school in Texas, I think it gave us something to discuss there, and many of you weighed in. Today, a pre-scheduled guest who was already set to come on, but also is in a unique position maybe to talk about this, coming from the realm of law enforcement and prosecution. And again, we'll take phone calls, and we can go beyond just what happened in Texas since this is a local guest, but feel free to join in the conversation and go where you'd like, as we're joined by Davidson County District Attorney Glenn Funk. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. How are you doing, Nick?
Yeah, thank you for coming on.
Glad to be here.
Originally scheduled you to come on, there's obviously cases locally that we were going to discuss. And again, you were reelected. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so we can touch on some of those if folks would like to, but obviously what we saw happen in Texas at the elementary school, as everyone's still talking even today. I'm wondering, as a prosecutor, we talked to the sheriff yesterday and had his thoughts. What, again, is your reaction in this most recent one and the string that we've been seeing?
No, it's just another kick in the stomach. It's horrendous. It's when will enough be enough for us to make meaningful changes in our gun laws and in our attitudes toward firearms? We've seen this tremendous proliferation of weapons in our whole country over the last 20 years or so. You know, Nashville's not immune. We've had 2 mass shootings in Nashville. We had the Burnett Chapel Church of Christ mass shooting, Emmanuel Sampson. We had the Waffle House mass shooting, which we just got to trial earlier this year. And so, you know, how can we as a society decide it is okay to send our kids off to school and not know if they're going to come home in the afternoon? Automatic weapons in the hands of the people that would commit mass murder, freely flowing in our society, gun sales that go unchecked without even any background checks. No meaningful legislation can get through our Congress. Our state legislature makes it easier and easier to buy and possess weapons. There's a bill to let 18-year-olds in Tennessee carry firearms. You know, everything is going to make it, all the legislation has been making it easier and easier to obtain firearms, to buy firearms, to own firearms, to have a firearm on you at all times. We're not just talking about having a firearm in the nightstand next to your bed, right? We're talking about, you know, 5 years ago, the legislature made it to where even if you weren't licensed, even if you hadn't gone through training, you could have a firearm in your a weapon in your car. Now we're a constitutional carry state, which means you can carry it out in public without even having any training. It's no wonder that we've seen an increase in shootings. You know, I was talking to the commander and the top lieutenants in Madison Precinct a couple months ago, and they'd had a situation where 2 motorists got into an argument on Old Hickory Boulevard in Madison, driving down Old Hickory Boulevard, and somebody gets a gun out and starts trying to shoot out the other motorist's tires, like you would see on television. Well, what can go wrong on Old Hickory Boulevard with somebody discharging a weapon and have bullets caroming off of the asphalt? You know, we're lucky nobody got injured, much less died, but you know, that's something that you know, they're frustrated with. Our officers are frustrated with. The citizens of our entire country are fed up, and yet we're not taking meaningful steps to make sure that the general public is safe, and we could do that with common sense gun reform.
Yeah, and you talk about the gun reform. That's part of, and it only really comes up in earnest after some of these horrible events. And the discussion right now is gun reform. Others, you know, talking about, you know, Tennessee, of course, is a big Second Amendment state, a lot of responsible gun owners. And the other aspect of it is trying to keep guns out of the hands of those who should not have them. And that brings you mentioned the Waffle House shooting case in Travis Reinking. And we know how he ended up with some of those weapons. His father ended up, I think, just recently up in Illinois, being convicted in terms of a connection of returning the guns to him after they were taken away in Illinois, and he has them down here. How do you balance that? I mean, you make the point that there needs to maybe be some gun reform on who can get access and what types of weapons. But there's a lot of folks who are going to say, well, there's just Glenn Funk, another liberal guy that wants to take guns out of our hands. And, you know, it's really not guns that kill people, it's people that kill people. I hear that all the time. It's a combination. Is there a composite here that you should look at beyond just the gun control?
Well, you cannot possess a weapon before you're 21 years old. You cannot possess a weapon if you've been convicted of a felony. You cannot possess a weapon if you've been convicted of a domestic violence offense. You cannot possess a weapon if you've got certain mental health diagnoses. But in some ways it's kind of like, well, you can't drive a car unless you've got a driver's license, but there's thousands of unlicensed drivers driving. As long as we are awash in weapons, it's pretty easy for anybody to get their hands on a firearm. Our office takes it very seriously. If you are one of those prohibited, what laws are still on the books, we aggressively prosecute. If you are a person who is one of those people who is prohibited from having a firearm, we never dismiss those cases. We always go forward on those cases. We always ask for incarceration on those cases, because that is as serious of an offense as you can have, is short of actually hurting somebody, because that every person that has those weapons when they're not supposed to have them, that's a potential.
Do you see a spike in those cases in your office right now? What's it been like over, say, the last 6 months to a year in terms of those types of cases, comparatively speaking?
You know, it's been fairly consistent over the last several years.
Okay.
You know, it used to be that we would see a lot of carrying a weapon cases for folks that didn't have a permit, and they'd have them in their car, and well, that's no longer a crime, so the police cannot even make the arrest when they see the butt of the gun sticking out when they make a stop for speeding. There's still an offense for possession of a gun while you're under the influence, and so sometimes somebody might get a DUI and have a gun, and then they get this extra charge, and we take those very seriously. You know, sometimes we have a case where there's not a DUI that's attached to it, but then there's a possession under the influence, and if we don't have the facts to be able to prove the influence part, then we don't have a case. And so there's a handful of those gun cases that get dismissed, but pretty much we treat that as not only an enhancing factor, but a need for a separate conviction on those cases. But the number of people who possess a weapon and now commit a criminal offense is far smaller than the folks that had criminal offenses on weapons charges before, because now it's only pretty much if you're a prohibited person or if you actually possess it during the commission of a crime.
You know, a lot of people will talk about, well, can't we find ways to keep these folks from getting hold of the guns, you know, because maybe of mental health cases, things like this, before anything happens. As a prosecutor, though, and I think about this sometimes, I'm like, well, why can't you lock them up before this happens? You can't really prosecute or charge someone for a crime you think they may commit.
Right.
That's the issue here. You may see red flags, and we're looking for red flags with this 18-year-old in Texas. They're going back through and looking to see, are there things we missed here? He's clearly a troubled kid, but nothing to indicate he would do this. You can't really just say, oh yeah, this guy looks like he might, let's go get him. I wish there was a way. You remember that Tom Cruise movie Minority Report years ago, where they'd, you know, go about that, something like that.
I'm glad you enjoy highbrow entertainment like that. That's
I'm gonna
really
go see
good.
Top
That's
Gun
nice.
in a couple of days. So all right.
All right. But look, it is so easy to get a weapon.
Yeah.
And you give me $100 bill, I don't even need my car. I could be back here in 30 minutes with a weapon.
What do you mean? Buying it at a store or buying it on the street?
I can go buy a gun on the street. That easily. It is a problem when we have this many guns in circulation.
Okay, and every couple of weeks, Metro PD releases their report of the number of guns stolen from vehicles, right?
Right, and if you are a gun owner, you have to be responsible as a gun owner. You can't leave your gun in your car. You can't leave your gun in an unlocked car. You need to bring it in. You need to secure it. Those guns need to be secured at all times. You need to be responsible. Even though you don't have to take a safety class, you need to take a gun safety class. You need to make sure that when you are carrying a weapon legally, that you're not going to put yourself in a position where you might be prone to use it. I know there's a lot of talk about, well, you know, the thing that's best to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. But if you hadn't even had any training, right? And there's a lot of times when, you know, police are on the scene, and you know, who's better trained than our police? Nobody. And if they can't even stop before that first shot gets fired, stop the person, well, you know, having the reaction is not as good as if we could stop it in the first place. So I'm anxious to see if at some point we don't see the pendulum start swinging back the other way toward being more responsible in our recognition of our Second Amendment rights and the way that the way that we take advantage of our Second Amendment rights. Because part of this is, as a community, we have to be more responsible. Some of that would come through legislation, and not just have this knee-jerk reaction of absolutely no legislation. We need to do some things to protect ourselves.
Gotcha. Listen, we're going to take a break. We'll talk more. We've got some phone calls coming in, and I'm going to screen through some of the questions folks may have on Facebook as well.
Sure.
So more of our conversation with District Attorney Glenn Funk right after this. Stay with us. I was going to follow up and ask you